and she doubted that these men would have welcomed another burden besides herself on this journey. Eva grimaced at the thought of being seen as a burden by these men. She didn't care for the designation much, but her brother had made no bones about the fact that a burden was all she had been to him since her parents' deaths when she was 9. Despite all of her efforts to stay out of his way, her directing the servants for him, and even pitching in and helping them when necessary in an attempt to make up for what little food she ate, all of it had been for naught. Jonathan had found her presence unbearable, to the point that when he was unable to find her a husband, rather than allow her to live out her days at Caxton, he had been preparing to send her to a nunnery. Then these men had arrived with an offer to bride her. Eva shook her head at the way her life path had changed so abruptly. 2 days ago she had awoken with the glum realization that this was the last full day she would spend in her childhood home. The very next morning she was to be sent to the Abbey to join her next older sister as a bride of God. Something Eva didn't really think she was suited to. She had always thought of nuns as serene and graceful brides of the Lord, and even Eva had to admit that she was anything but serene. As for graceful, it was not a word that had ever been used to describe her. But that had been 2 days ago. By mid-morning of that day, her future had been put into question when Mavis had sought her out in the gardens to inform her that 6 Scots had arrived and were bartering with Jonathan for her hand in marriage. Eva had, at first, been sure the girl was wrong about this. Her brother had told her repeatedly that he had nothing to offer as her dower, so there was nothing over which to barter. But, as it turned out, they weren't bartering over what Jonathan would pay to be rid of her, rather what the Scots would pay to have her. Eva had still been reeling in shock from that news when Mavis had informed her that they were Macadies. Never having paid much heed to gossip, Eva hadn't understood the relevance behind this news. Mavis had recognised this at once from her blank expression, and had taken an unseemly delight in telling the tale of the night-walking, blood-lusting vampires the Macadies were claimed to be, adding a horrified,
"Oh, 'tis too awful, my lady. You, married to one of those monsters."
Eva had shushed the girl, telling her it was all stuff and nonsense, but the maid's words had plagued her ever since. It was nonsense, of course, wasn't it?
"Of course it is,"
she assured herself stoutly, for probably the 100th time in 2 days. After all, hadn't Ewan and the 5 Macady men with him arrived at Caxton at mid-morning, in clear daylight? According to the rumours Mavis had repeated, they shouldn't have been able to manage such a feat were they vampires who would perish at the touch of the sun's light. Of course, when she'd said as much to Mavis, the girl had explained that Cook had said that the Macadies weren't all vampires, that the laird had married a Macnacton woman who was one, and some of the people of Macady had followed suit. Their offspring were half-breeds, but that there were still mortal men among them, a necessity to accomplish what the soulless bloodlusters could not. These men, she had announced, were obviously the mortal helpers, servants to the vampire, sent to collect her for their laird, who was a son of the Macady laird and his soulless bride, and therefore unable to travel in daylight. Eva had been less impressed with this news. Her only response had been a snort of disbelief, which hadn't been as convincing as she would have liked. The maid had managed to plant the seed of doubt in her mind with her tales.
"It's silly, really, Milly," Eva assured her mare. "There is no such thing as vampire. 'Tis a myth, like sirens of the sea."
"She's talking to hersel again."
Ewan managed to restrain the sigh that wanted to slip from his lips at Donal's words. He had rather hoped that the men wouldn't notice that Lady Eva was again talking to herself. An unlikely feat when he and Donal rode behind the woman with a perfect view every time she took the trouble to start mumbling away. The lass had been doing so since they'd ridden out of the gates of Caxton Keep that first afternoon on the long journey from Caxton on the northern coast of England to Macady in northern Scotland. And the men had been pointing it out in worried tones ever since. It was obvious that they worried that their new lady was mad.
"The Macady will only be pleased to find himself landed with a mad wife,"
Donal commented. Ewan sighed at these words.
"Nay, he will only be pleased,"
Keddy agreed. He'd been riding on the woman's left, but now dropped back to join the conversation.
"And nae doubt he'll be blaming us for it."
"Nay," Donnie protested, dropping back from his position on their new lady's right to join the conversation as well.